Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the big one, the $1,000 gaming PC build. And I know what you're thinking, oh, it's PC Centric, he's gonna do all these different cuts and things. Oh, it's gonna be over $1,000.
Actually, it's under
980 something at the time of filming. Ha, you're wrong. And I absolutely have to admit that I'm incredibly surprised just what you can get in 2023 for $1,000. It is pretty incredible. I mean, look at this. In the budget is the RX 6700 XT, a card with 12 gigabytes of VRAM, capable of 1080 and 1440p gaming, all within a build for $1,000 that you can upgrade to your heart's content. So ladies and gentlemen, crap, I forgot that was in the box. Ladies and gentlemen, let's build this thing without breaking anything after a short word from this video sponsor. Maybe I should stop throwing boxes around. Lee & Lee's new Galahad 2 Trinity coolers are here, and by Jove are they gorgeous. With up to 3 factory-fitted RGB fans, these coolers look stunning and are super simple to connect thanks to daisy-chainable fan connections and a single L-Connect 3 box. There's even 3 different appearances thanks to swappable covers. So regardless of whether you're after something for looks, performance, or both, Lee & Lee has you covered. Check them out today with a link down below. Rightio then, shall we begin? And I actually want to start by talking a little bit about the case actually. We've got all of these components, but obviously the chassis is something you're going to have to live with for a very long time. I mean, you can swap it out, but people don't tend to. And you may have heard of this brand before, it's Montech, and this is a brand new case. We actually saw it first at Computex. This is the Air 703 Max, and it comes in around about $79. It'll probably be a little bit less if you're watching this video in like a year's time, but for now it's available at the RRP. And the crazy thing about it is that it comes with 4 fans, and I'm pretty sure all of them are RGB for within that cost. It comes in black or white, you've got tempered glass, and obviously you've got so much airflow on the front. And I think you also have USB Type-C, which is something you just don't see on cheap cases. So already you've got something that is very upgradable, something with not the best, but decent enough build quality that's definitely in budget. I mean, is it easy to get into? Yes, probably a little bit too easy. I mean, the glass isn't the thickest in the world. Obviously that did fall off, but you can see on the inside, you've got plenty of room to build in. You have all of these little cable grommets and things, which is nice. Again, you don't see this often on cheaper cases, but I'm already starting to see something interesting around the other side. But the thing that I wanted to draw your attention to is this little hub here, because again, you don't see this on a lot of cases, especially one that does both RGB and fan speed. And this means you can go for a cheaper motherboard if you want, you don't have to worry about plugging them all in separately, and it does make cable management that little bit easier. So I don't know about you, but I think for the money, I am pretty blown away by what you get for the price point. The joke there is that there are 4 fans, so you've got loads of airflow. If you're new to PC gaming, you're probably thinking, who is this guy and why am I watching him? That's what my fiance says to me every night. Yeah, she's super creepy. She watches me sleep. But anyway, let's park this to one side for a second and we'll start our build. And it does start with the motherboard, and this is where we're making a little bit of a compromise. It's not what I personally would want to go for. I'd want to spend slightly more to get the latest generation of Ryzen, but within this budget, it's just not feasible. But don't go thinking that this then isn't upgradable. Obviously, you can grab like a Ryzen 9 CPU or maybe like a 5800X3D at a later date, especially if you go for used. It will be pretty cheap in a couple of years' time, and you'll get loads more performance. I mean, the CPU that we're going to pair it with is this one. This is a Ryzen 5 5600X. It's a 6-core computer. It's a 6-core processor for your computer, and for gaming, it's going to be absolutely fine. I mean, in certain games, especially things like Warzone, you probably will see a little bit of bottlenecking with this, but for the money, it's pretty crazy, really. I think you can get this around about $140, $150 or something like that. Pretty wild, really, for the amount of performance. And if you think you were going to go for the latest gen Ryzen, you'd have to spend like 60, 70 pounds more on a motherboard. Probably the same actually for the CPU as well, and then you're looking at 150 pounds for performance that a lot of people might not even need. But let's press on and actually get our motherboard out of the box, shall we? This is one from ROG. This is the STRIX B550E, but I don't think they actually sell the E anymore, so you should get the F. There's actually a revised F2 as well. The problem with B550 at the moment is they're a little bit few and far between. I mean, I do have some cheaper ones that are completely discontinued that you can't get hold of, so I would recommend having a look at the market, and if you can buy one for a little bit less money, it's probably going to be worth doing so. But fundamentally, this is basically the same as the F version. I think there are a couple of changes, but for all intents and purposes, they're very, very similar. I should note, by the way, that while it's probably not an issue in 2023, not all of the B550 motherboards will support the 5000 series of CPUs straight out of the box. Some of them will require a BIOS update, and that's why it's important to buy a motherboard that has this USB BIOS flashback utility. I've done a video all about this. You can find it in the top right corner of your screen, but I imagine if you're buying one of these that are fairly recent, it should support it straight out of the box, because these are not exactly brand new CPUs. As always, we will be building on top of the motherboard box because it's just so much easier. You have more light, you can actually access everything, and you'll start to see all of these little headers and things around the side of the motherboard. This is where our front panel audio will go. This is a little error code. This is really useful if you've got a problem with your PC. It will tell you basically what the problem is. You've got your RGB headers here. One is standard RGB, one is addressable. Chances are you'll be using this. Chassis fans are located throughout the motherboard. You've got your CPU fans here. This obviously is to connect all of your fans. You can control the fan speeds and things in the motherboard software or in the BIOS. Down here you've got some onboard USB. This will be useful if you want to upgrade later to like a fancy cooler and you want to control it in software, but most coolers really, especially what we're using today, will just use the standard fan headers. It is basically exactly the same as the USB that you've got on the back. It's just the motherboard dedicates some of that bandwidth to internal rather than external. Right next to it actually is where you plug in your front panel connections, and when we say front panel, we are talking about the front of the case, so things like your power, maybe your reset, HD LEDs, these connect to these tiny little headers here, but then we also have some onboard USB for the front of the case as well. So this is the one for USB 3, which is typically USB-C, and then your USB 3, USB type A. If you're using hard drives or old-fashioned SSDs, then you'll be using these SATA ports here, but other than that, the only other thing I think you really need to know is that you've got your power connections here. One is called ATX for the motherboard and everything else really, and then your CPU has dedicated power at the top left. Everything else we're going to walk you through as we build it. And the first thing really that you need to know is you're going to have to grab your CPU. You will gently take it out of the box because this is probably the most sensitive part that you're going to handle. Do not bend the pins on this Ryzen CPU or you will be sorry because it won't be working anymore. Then you just need to open up this little latch. It's actually been a while since I've done the older generation of Ryzen. It seems weird to have pins again. These just gently drop into place. Hopefully your CPU won't be as dirty as mine, but I've used this countless times before. Then you can grab your memory, or as it's more commonly known, RAM, and you're going to open up these little slots here, 2 and 4. You don't put them next to each other because you want dual channel operation. If you have them directly next to each other, essentially you'll get half the speed. So just take the RAM out of the box, and this is some stuff from Kingston. It's DDR4, not DDR5. Please don't buy DDR5 for this, it's not going to work. And this was among one of the cheapest RGB 3600 megahertz kits that you can buy in a capacity of 16 gig. And 16 gigabytes for a gaming PC should be absolutely fine. There are going to be titles coming out that will require more than 16, but this is generally only going to be at the highest quality presets, which, let's be honest, we're not really going to be accessing anyway with this particular CPU and GPU. As powerful as they are, they're obviously not like a RTX 4090. As we neatly put all of our packaging away, by the way, I will also say that because a lot of this stuff is now the previous generation, it's worth looking around for deals. Don't specifically buy any of these things necessarily if you find something that's cheaper. I mean, to be fair, I think the SSD probably is a very good bet. This is the 980. This is a 500 gig one. I've actually priced this up for a 1 terabyte because I don't think there's any point buying 500 at the moment unless you really need to save every penny, because the difference between, I think this is like $25 to $35 or something for the 500 gig versus about $45 for the 1 terabyte, it does make a lot of sense. I mean, this is going to work absolutely fine, but games like Warzone do take up quite a lot of space. So if you do want to have more than, I don't know, like 6 or 7 games installed at any one time alongside all your other files, it does make sense to grab a terabyte, especially as they're so cheap now. As you can see, I've just taken this heatsink off. That's going to help with cooling. We have this little SSD screw here that needs to be removed. Then we can pick up our PCI Gen 3 SSD. Definitely not the fastest, but more than enough for gaming and for most people's general use. We drop this down, screw it into place. If you haven't already, make sure you take the label off the thermal pad. Then we're just going to gently place that back down and screw it into place. At this stage, we're now ready to install our cooler, and you can absolutely use the stock cooler that comes with the 5600X. It's not going to be the best, but that CPU doesn't use masses of power, so it's not the end of the world. But for the sake of about $30, $35, you can grab this, which is the Hyper 212 Halo, which not only looks a whole lot better, but fundamentally it has more performance, it's quieter, and it is going to let your CPU run at a lower temperature, which in theory should help to extend its life. And from memory, I think these are very easy to install. I've used this one once before, but the 212 is like one of the oldest products ever in the PC gaming space. Like, genuinely, look it up, it's been going for decades. All right, maybe not decades, a very long time. Just take the fan off of it. So you have this little heat sink that uses heat pipes to draw the heat away from the CPU. up into the heatsink, and then the fans will blow this out of your system. Then hopefully your case fans will blow that out of the PC entirely. Then we use a screwdriver to remove the default AM4 mounting hardware. You then grab the AMD bracket and put this underneath the cooler, and then you screw these screws into the cooler from the underside. It is actually simple enough when you know what you're doing, but I feel like if you don't look at the instructions, it can get a bit confusing. Then we can do a little test fit just to make sure we've done this properly. All of these holes should now line up with the ones on the board, which they do, which means we can do this for real by adding some thermal compounds that essentially is going to get rid of that air gap between the CPU and the cooler itself. Just a little splodge in the middle should be fine. So we just lay this over the top, screw down nice and gently in a little cross pattern, otherwise the other side will start to rise up. Then we can tighten it down for real. Put our fan back on with the cable facing downwards. It literally just presses on, and you can actually buy an extra fan and use the additional clips if you do want to have more cooling, but for this CPU it should be absolutely fine. And then with those two dangly cables, you need to plug them in. We've got addressable RGB, and the nearest one for this is by the RAM, just above that ATX connection. Then we need to do the same with the fan, and they make it very helpful for you because CPU fan on this board is labeled with a grey colour, and all the rest are black. So you shouldn't be able to make the mistake. And once again, just do some basic tidying up. And then I think you have essentially your gaming PC. If you put a graphics card in this and you plugged it all in, it would work. It just doesn't look quite right because it's not in the case. So let's do that. And I will also say that if you do want to buy this case in black, you can do so. I asked for the white one because I forgot we were going to do a black build. But to be fair, black in white absolutely looks fine. It's more if you put white components in a black PC that it can start to look a little bit more odd. You just gently line this up with the back of the case. All of these standoffs I think are pre-applied for us. And when I say standoffs, I'm talking about these little screw holders, I suppose technically they are. They're underneath the motherboard and they sort of hold it in place and they stop you shorting out the back of your motherboard. They give it separation between the metals basically. And then it seems I'm always making this mistake, so don't copy me, do this first. You want to grab the screws that come in this little box that you find in hard drive cage. And in this bag you find loads of different screws, but they should be labelled. Yeah, there we go, mainboard / SSD. You're going to want to grab the screws from this bag. And I do like the fact that they're silver actually, because it goes with a white case. And then just fill up the screw holes basically. Simple as that. We have a gaming PC starting to take shape. We're now cooking on gas, ladies and gentlemen, that I suppose we shouldn't be doing. We should be moving away to induction hobs, but that's a topic for a later video. But round the back, it is going to be worth grabbing some of these cables and starting to plug them into the board, because it does make sense to do it before you add everything else, because then everything gets in the way. So all of these cables and things that you'll see at the back do need to do something. You'll notice this one, this is called a SATA connection. This is typically used for third-party devices, things like coolers, or in this case, the case lighting. That's what's going to provide it all of the power. We've got some addressable RGB here, so you can sync up your motherboard to the case and everything can work together. And then in this little bundle of joy down the bottom, you have loads more cables. So we've got our HD audio. This was the one at the bottom left. We've got USB 3. And somewhere, yes, should be the rest of our front panel. So our power switch, HD LEDs, and our power LEDs that we spoke about earlier. I'll give you the very quick lowdown on what we call cable management. Doesn't sound that interesting, but at the very least, it's going to allow you to actually close your system back up. At best, it will make it look nice and pretty, and in theory, it gives you better airflow, but I mean, it doesn't really, let's be honest. But essentially, all you need to do is find the different sort of cables and then work out where they live on the motherboard and then feed them through in the respective places. So for example, if we grab this USB-C, I'll find where that is on the motherboard, poke my finger through, and then feed that back. And you're probably wondering why I haven't taken this out of this little loop. It's because quite often you do need to sort of double stack them together to make use of that cable length, because what you don't want is to have this that you've got to sort of tie down somewhere. Where possible, you want to use this little channel to get all of the cables, and I suppose the bulk of it, nice and safe and secure there. Right, so I fed everything through. Apologies if this now looks a little bit messy, but that's just the way it has to be. So we'll plug our USB 3 in by the ATX. Look, USB-C goes underneath that. We've got our fiddly ones, look, down the bottom. It's always worth looking at your motherboard manufacturer's manual because it tells you exactly which ones are which. But your reset is bottom right. Power switch is just above that, which is top right. HD LEDs is bottom left. And then just above that, you've got your power LEDs, and it goes positive on the left, negative on the right. Basically, it's very easy if you build PCs every week, or you watch my videos every week. Not quite so simple if you build one PC every 4 years. We'll then come across to our fan. We'll plug this into chassis fan 3. Don't forget this is connected to a hub, so all of these fans are now going to be controlled just by chassis fan 3. Right next to this, we've got our other addressable RGB, and we can sync everything together with the ASUS Aura software if we want everything to be green or everything to be rainbow all at the same time. And then at the very bottom left, a lot of people don't even need to plug this in. We have our front panel audio, and this is for analog audio if you're using like a pair of headphones that's got a cable, or anything really like headset that uses 2 different 3.5mm jacks. That was actually pretty straightforward, right? All of the fiddly bits, they are fiddly, but they're not difficult. And to be fair, that is pretty much the hardest thing about building a gaming PC now done. You've only got 2 components left, our graphics card and our power supply. I'm going to do the power supply next because it's typically good practice. There are some cases where if you put your GPU in now, it's just going to mean that you've got mass where you don't want it basically, whereas you do this, it makes it a little bit easier to cable manage. And I know what people are thinking. You've already been screaming in the comments, PC Centric, Marcus, yes that is my name.
You're an idiot.
Why on earth are you recommending an 850 watt power supply for a $1,000 gaming PC? Well, guess what? I'm not. It is literally just the one that I have. This comes in loads of different flavors. You can get 550, 650, 750. And the one I'd recommend to most people would probably be the 750 because it's a fair bit cheaper than this, but only like $10 more than the 650. But the one that we're going to spec for this is the 650 watt because that is the minimum requirements of this GPU. It's only really going to matter, to be fair, if you want to upgrade to like a better graphics card. At some point you want something with 750 watts. Not a bad idea to do so, but Be Quiet power supplies are very reliable. I've not really had an issue with them ever, I don't think. And of course, as the name would suggest, they are very quiet. This one is also what we call a modular power supply, so you see that all of the cables are not actually attached. And a lot of the cheaper power supplies not only use cheaper components, but they save money by having the cables physically attached, which to be honest is absolutely fine. It's a good way of saving some money. If you can buy a decent power supply for this rig for less money, by all means go for it, as long as it's got the wattage and is from a reliable brand. But this is going to be a lot more future-proof. Most people keep their power supplies for years and years. I mean, the one I've got over there is certainly getting on a bit. I think that was released like 10 years or something ago, and it still works absolutely fine, right? And the other benefit is if you do want to go for fancy cables at some point, make it look ultra pretty, it's a lot easier to buy some Be Quiet compatible cables, plug it into this, rather than having to use extensions and then just have more bulk that you need to worry about, essentially. But let's go right ahead and get these cables untied. We're going to need one ATX that you can't miss because it's massive, one 8-pin CPU. This board does actually have a 8+4, but we're not using a CPU that's going to get close to using that much power, so it's probably not worth plugging in. Unless you want it to look neater, then maybe you can. A daisy chain SATA power connection, and then last but certainly not least, our PCIe for our graphics card power. So let's plug these in and connect these now. They're very clearly labeled, but sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to differentiate between your PCIe and your CPU, but just look at the labels and then you can't make that mistake. Oh, you know what? I didn't even notice that. If you want to use an NVIDIA graphics card, look, this actually supports PCI Gen 5 as well. I imagine you're not going to get 600 watts of power on the lower spec models, but the 850 does have that. But anyway, that was a tangent. Let's grab our now complete power supply, and then you just need to drop this down into the basement. Grab these little screws that are labeled as PSU/PCIe. I should mention, by the way, that we've got the fan facing downwards so that it can breathe cool air in from the bottom and exhaust this down the back. What you don't want to do is have the fan facing up if you've got like this. I mean, to be fair, it would actually work in this because you've got a mesh, but a lot of cases have a solid panel here, and that's a surefire way to, at the very least, have a very hot and very loud running power supply. At worst, kill it. So yeah, most cases, fan facing downwards. Just like we did with all of those case cables, find all of your power connections and then feed them through to their respective places. So for example, this is our ATX. Let's do our CPU next. Just connects up here. Very simple when you've not got a radiator or fans up here. We'll get the PCIe ready for the graphics card by drawing it through this hole here. And then I think last, but certainly not least, we have our SATA connection, which again is for that case lighting. We just plug this in, there you go, like that. And you should have all of these spare cables that you don't need, but you would use if you're using like hard drives or SSDs or things. So we can just tuck that into the hard drive cage, to be fair, just out of sight, out of mind, so you're not gonna see that. We will also use one cable tie, look, just to keep this CPU cable out of the way. And then I think that leaves just one final component. Always the most exciting of any PC build, the graphics card. And as you can see, I haven't actually used this one before. I think this is one AMD recently sent out. It's from Sapphire. And here you go, look. This is a dual fan model. You can buy ones that have 3 fans, but it's not really necessary for this sort of card, to be honest with you, and you will be paying a fair bit more money for it. But of course, if you can buy one with 3 fans for the same sort of price, do go for it. Are you ready for the peel? I would give that a 5 out of 10. This particular card is called the Pulse. There's not anything particularly crazy going on. You've got an 8+6 on the back, decent back plate. This actually feels like metal, not plastic, which is nice. You don't really have a pass-through design when it comes to thermals, but again, I don't think this is going to get crazy hot. We will, of course, be testing this in just a second. The main difference really between the old generation and the new generation of AMD graphics cards, beside the performance, is the fact that these display ports are 1.4 rather than the new 2.1 that you find on the 7900 XDX. I think you find it on the 7600 as well. Not that you're ever going to need that. In order to get this inserted, we need to remove the PCIe slot covers that are very thankfully real rather than sort of metal that you have to bend out. So we take these 2 out because it's a 2-slot card. If you have a 3-slot card, you guessed it, you need to take 3 out. We'll then pick up our GPU and you give it a good push till it clicks. Screw it back down into place. Plug it in with these PCIe connections. You can daisy chain them or you can have 2 separate ones. There's a big debate about whether you should or shouldn't. I mean, in theory, it is better to not daisy chain them, but I've never had an issue unless like I was right on the limit with the power, which we're definitely not going to be here today. And personally, I prefer to have a cleaner looking system, but if you disagree with me, that's fine. Just use 2 cables. And that is pretty much it. Just tidy up the cables a bit. Obviously, you can do this later once you know it works. I always say don't put your side panels back on until you've tested everything works, because you might have a fan that's got a cable stuck in it or something and you want to be able to quickly turn this off if there is a problem. But other than that, not really any complaints. I mean, this case has been ridiculously easy to build in, and there's what, 2 niggles that I've had so far? For the money, pretty crazy. Hopefully the fans will be okay. Cable management, I've actually done a decent job without really doing anything. We've got 1 cable tie. As I say, it'd be nice to have this a little bit more bunched out the way. We could definitely tidy these up a bit more, but in terms of practicality, I don't see an issue with this at all. Oh, so let's put this to one side. We'll grab our monitor. We will grab our keyboard, mouse, and most importantly of all, the PC-centric mouse mat. Look at this thing. You can buy yours with a link down in the description below. And yes, we pretty much ship, I don't think it's technically worldwide, but it's most places, including UK. Change the currency at the top right-hand corner. It's very simple. So we've got our keyboard and mouse connected. I'm going to hook this up to a monitor with DisplayPort, but obviously HDMI is absolutely fine. We plug in our internet connection or our Wi-Fi antenna if we're using that. Our power supply cable. We'll make sure it's on at the back. And then if everything works, when we press the button, we should get some lights. That was perfectly set up, wasn't it? I'm going to do some basic troubleshooting by making sure the power switch is definitely connected to the right place. So what I'll do now is plug the reset switch into the power button on the motherboard. And if this works, which it doesn't, then we'd know we had a problem with the power button. I mean, it doesn't look very live, does it? I'll be honest, this hasn't happened in a while. I mean, the symptoms that we've got here are no lights on anything at all, and this would usually suggest that either the power supply or the motherboard doesn't work, because if the motherboard works, you'd expect to get some lights, but then if the power supply works, you'd probably expect to get some lights. I mean, it's literally a brand new power supply, but that's going to be the easiest thing to test with something else. I mean, I haven't actually used this motherboard in, well, I suppose a couple of years. The last time I used it was at my old address, so maybe it got damaged in the move. But we'll try with a different power supply first. Sorry about this, guys. This was not supposed to happen. If you watch the channel regularly, you know this basically never really happens. No, I think it's the board, you know. Oh, must have got damaged in shipping. Righto, let me swap the board then. Completely different motherboards. Surely this is gonna work, please. Here we go. Yes. Okay, it doesn't work, but we have something. This is better, and I can explain almost certainly what happened, which don't laugh, but long story short, when I moved here almost a couple of years ago, I didn't want the moving people to know that I was moving loads of expensive stuff, right? Because this was before it all went into a storage space, all of that stuff. So all of my motherboards and graphics cards, I labeled as tax records. So they're all these ridiculously big, heavy boxes, and they're like, tax records 13 to 14, tax records 16 to 17. And obviously they didn't treat those boxes with the same respect that they might have done if I've actually said, motherboard's fragile, please don't drop. That's a lesson learned. But the question is, will this motherboard work? Oh. I mean, we still have an error light. Oh, yes! And I know what you're saying.
Oh, Marcus, you're putting this on. You can't get so excited. You build them every week.
The whole thing didn't work. Dead motherboard. Your PC almost certainly won't have a copy of Windows on it though, so you need to download Windows 11 from the website, whack it on a flash drive, put it in the back of your PC. I mean, if it doesn't, just hit the delete key when you first turn your PC on until it comes up with a BIOS. It looks a little bit like this. You want to check this little box that says XMP, as this is going to overclock the RAM to get the fastest RAM speed possible, give you better performance, especially with Ryzen. Somewhere over here it will say Smart Fan. You want to set this to be silent and then apply to all of the fans. Go into the settings, find the setting that says above 4G decoding. If you have a newer motherboard, it does all of this automatically, or if you have a up-to-date BIOS, I suppose. Enable above 4G decoding, find resizable bar, turn this to automatic, as this again can give you better performance. I realize as well we do also need to go into the miscellaneous settings and find the TPM setting. AMD CPU firmware TPM. Turn this on. This is going to allow us to actually run Windows 11. And then you head over to boot. Then you want to go into boot settings, make sure that your flash drive is the first device listed, and then save and exit. Apologies if this sounds very complicated. It shouldn't be really, it's just a few things to tweak. Again, if you've got an up-to-date BIOS, then all of these things should be done for you. And obviously loading into Windows, that will also be automatic. But because I already have a copy of Windows on the SSD, it's trying to load into that. Does a little bit of loader. There's the Windows 11 Pro, but obviously if you're using Home, select Home. You don't actually need a license key just yet, by the way. You can do this a little bit later. Here you can see my old Windows install, but I want to have Windows 11 on this PC, so I am deleting everything else. Be very careful if you do this. You do not want to wipe an SSD by mistake. But everyone should now be at this stage where it says drive 0, unallocated space. This is basically a brand new SSD. So you hit new, hit apply, okay, basically just saying yes to everything. Hit next, and then it will install Windows. Your PC should restart, and you'll be ready to get gaming. I am sorry that that was a lot more complicated than it needed to be. I'm still going to recommend that you grab that ASUS motherboard because, as I say, getting damaged in transit is not something that should happen to you. There we go. Just give me a few hours to get some games running on this thing and we'll be back. And just like that, we are all set up and ready to go. We will add our side panel. I will secure it on before I do this because it's all about the peel. Satisfying. And actually, on the whole, I would say I'm really happy with this. I mean, I wouldn't have gone with white. I think it would look better with black components personally, but you've got to hand it to Montech. I mean, having 4 fans, granted 3, not 4 of them are RGB, and all of this from the case is really good. And while there are a couple of niggly things, I think this is very easy to recommend, and this has got to be one of the best budget cases out there, no doubt about it. So let's get gaming, shall we? And the first game that I want us to test is the title I'm actively playing right now. It's taking up a lot of my life. This is some Diablo 4 and we're running at high settings 4K at 75 frames a second. I'll hit the recording button because I realized something that I have noticed on AMD systems is when you do start recording internally, you do lose a little bit more frame rate than you will on the Nvidia side. Like, I guess that's a good thing for Nvidia, right? The fact that Shadowplay doesn't really affect your frame rate too much. We've actually lost 10 frames a second or so at the moment. I think it's worse at higher resolutions, but it is definitely worth noting. So do add, call it 5 to 10 frames a second onto the figures you're seeing at the top left-hand corner of your screen. I've grouped everything together as well. Let me know if this is easy to read or not. You can see we've got our GPU at the top, 5600X below it, all of the utilization of different cores, and then the clock speed of the combined CPU. Obviously we've got our frame rate as well. You can see that it is actually a very steady frame time graph. This is good, it means we don't have any stutters or anything, and bear in mind we're recording as well. This is very, very good. But yeah, I mean, this goes to show that even though this is not a 4K gaming PC, for something like Diablo, which is probably the sort of game people are going to be playing on a 4K screen, even if they don't have the highest end GPU, you can see we're getting a really, really playable frame rate. I mean, you don't need any more than this at all, to be honest. I mean, sure, it will be nice, but it's hardly essential. And interestingly as well, we can see we are running this at 4K, but this was without any fancy Fidelity FX Super Resolution or anything, and this is Super Resolution 2. That is definitely worth using. So if you did want an even higher frame rate, you could set this to quality and it renders at a lower resolution, then upscales it and effectively gives you a very similar looking image. But let's turn this down to 1440p. And yeah, we're seeing an absolutely huge increase to the frame rate. We're now at around about 130 or so. So if you weren't recording, you're probably looking at about 150. Obviously, when you run into some combat, you are going to see lower frame rates. I mean, we're currently getting about 100, 110, 120 FPS. but this is going to happen on pretty much any system. I mean, clearly there's a lot of flexibility here. If you did want to play Diablo 4, this is going to be ideal for it. You're not really going to have to compromise on anything. Yeah, looking pretty good to me. I think you probably will run into some bottlenecking every now and then, but at that point the GPU is going to be working flat out as well anyway. So yeah, all round, very good experience with Diablo. Let's move on to something a bit more intense though, something a bit different. This is actually a code provided by AMD. This is some Deathloop, a game I've started but not yet finished. Quite a few of those. And I actually really enjoy this. It's a bit more like one of those stealthy type games where you sort of don't want to get caught, but obviously it is quite intensive. But I like the fact that this is very scalable. You don't have to necessarily set this to the highest settings. You can have this on a lower end system, or you can make the most of a higher end system to have something that really does look pretty incredible. This is currently set to the very high preset. This is running at 1440p, but we do have FSR here, and this is set to quality. And we're currently getting around about, what's that, 90 frames a second or so if we weren't recording, closer to 100. And for a single player game, especially one that's an FPS, I think this is pretty much bang on the money. Again, this is a really good use of your $1,000. You're getting a system that can pretty much play anything. But not only that, it can play everything at high frame rate, even at 1440p. Like, okay, not every title, but a lot of people will be playing on a 1080p screen, and you've got all of this in the bag. And of course, the other thing we can do is to go into the settings and turn on ray tracing. Quite why the text here is so big. I mean, that is terrible user interface, but whatever. We can go down here to ray traced performance. Yeah, you can see that doesn't really make too much difference at all. We've lost about, what, 5 frames a second or so maybe? But obviously you can set it to quality to get even more out of that. But yeah, another title, even if you want to run this at high resolution, it's a winner. But let's shift gears to something a lot more multiplayer, with everyone's favourite, some Apex Legends.
Oh, PC Centric, you say everything's everyone's favourite.
Yeah, I know, I run out of things to say, okay? I'm trying to big it up. Now let's move on to the next game. This is some Apex Legends. It's gonna run at a higher frame rate, you see? That's boring. So let's big things up once again and drop down into the city. A little bit more of an intense part of the map, this one. And we've got this set to 1440p, just under ultra settings. And immediately you can see the frame rate we're getting is pretty much through the roof, around about 170 frames a second. Once again, if we weren't recording, probably about, well, an extra 10, 15, 20 FPS more, something like that. So it's pretty remarkable, really. If you do want to play a game like this properly competitively, then you don't even need to lower down the settings to be able to achieve that. Shouldn't be a problem. But oh, I'm under attack, I'm under attack, I'm under attack. They're everywhere, they're everywhere. No, I've got no path, I've got no path. Come on, come on. I'm gonna get shot. I don't like this, I don't like this one bit. I've kind of forgotten now what I was saying. Oh yes, if you wanted to play on like a super high resolution or super high, here she is, here she is. No! What I was trying to say was that if you do want to go for like a 1080p 240Hz monitor, or maybe you want to play 1440p nearer 200Hz, you should be able to do it. Just lower the settings down to high, or obviously set it to 1080p, and you're not going to have an issue at all. Pretty impressive for, again, a $1,000 gaming PC. Out of interest actually, what will the frame rate be if we are going to run this at 1080p? I'll have to spectate because I'm not good enough. But it's still rendering, so it shouldn't matter. Yeah, there you go. I told you! Didn't I tell you? Right on the money. 240 frames a second, or it's actually up to 260 now. This is an Apex Legend powerhouse. But you know what? Let's properly stress this system with what I think is the best looking game you can get on PC at the moment, and this is some Returnal. Originally a PlayStation 5 game, but you got so many effects and things going on. I absolutely loved playing this game. I know I sound like a broken record. If you haven't played it yet, seriously pick it up. As you can see, it is a very difficult game to run if you want to run it at the highest quality settings. So this is just below epic actually. There's no ray tracing or anything. And this is a title that has DLSS if you're on NVIDIA, that can help to boost frame rates, but if you're on AMD, you don't currently have any FSR or anything like that. So this is running properly native at 1440p, and we're currently getting about 70 frames a second, which for a game like this is still pretty much bang on the money. It's a really capable machine. It's really capable of producing some amazing visuals. So let's have a look what happens if we go into the settings and we turn on ray tracing. But we go for reflections and we set them to low. We'll turn shadows to low. And what difference is that going to make? It has actually made the game feel a lot worse. You can definitely notice the added latency now, but the frame rate is still very good. I mean, we're currently at about 60 frames a second or so. And again, we're recording, so expect a little bit higher than that for real world. But to me, that just doesn't feel good enough to play with ray tracing. So I think we're gonna have to turn this down to 1080p. But then if you have a 1080p monitor, this is probably when you want to turn the ray tracing on, right? So there we are, we're now recording, and yeah, the game feels a lot better now. We're nearer the 80 frames a second mark. There's a lot less latency than there was before. And while this is going to get intense in certain areas, we are getting a little bit of stutter. You can now play with the ray tracing if you want that on. But I would say, just generally, if you do want the best ray tracing experience possible, you do want to go for NVIDIA, or at least go for the higher end AMD cards. But obviously, a £1,000 AMD graphics card is not going to fit into a $1,000 gaming PC. The only other thing that we need to mention, other than the fact that I wasn't paying attention and we've now lost, which is big sad times, thermals and acoustics, both are fantastic, about 70 degrees actually on both when it comes to maximums. And bear in mind this is running flat out with ray tracing. There's basically no noise whatsoever. It was quite loud out of the box, so make sure you do tune your fans. I had to set it like a custom manual fan curve, but other than that, yeah, it's been fantastic. And so there we go, ladies and gentlemen, our $1,000 gaming PC for 2023. What do you make of it? What do you like? What do you dislike? What would you change? I don't think there's really too much I would alter, other than if I had a little bit more budget, you could obviously upgrade a few components, maybe get like a higher capacity SSD, go for the 8-core 5800X rather than the 5600X. But generally speaking, I think everything is pretty well balanced. Let me know your thoughts on this down in the comment section below. If you have enjoyed this though, please smash the like button. It really helps us out. And of course, get subscribed so you don't miss loads of other builds like this. And if you do want to see some more builds at loads of different price points, guess what? There's loads on the channel. You can find those in the top right corner of your screen or in the end screen. But of course, if it is this particular gaming PC that's caught your fancy and you want to learn more about any of the components inside it, including current pricing, then you can find this link down below with my Amazon affiliate links. And while you're down there, why not gaze into the RGB light of the new Galahad 2 Trinity coolers? Available in black or white with RGB, performance or SL infinite fans, and in 240 or 360 configurations, there is bound to be a cooler that takes your fancy. Not only that, but thanks to thicker tubes, a new copper plate, 45-degree angle fittings, and a whopping 5-year warranty, you know your PC cooling is in safe hands. Learn more about them today with the link down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. We'll catch you in the next one.